FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and guess what? It's December 3rd, 2019. We made it to the new month. The new year is just less than a month away. It's really hard to believe how time flies when you're having fun, and we've been having nothing but fun this year, that's for sure. Well, we got a special treat for you today. If you happen to look at Zero Hedge, you would see that somebody paid $1.75 million for call options on gold at $4,000, a strike price, meaning they won't make anything on those options until gold crosses $4,000. Obviously, it's not for a couple of years, but it makes me wonder, is this person a time traveler? And do they know what the future is going to bring? And we got John Rubino on with us now, dollarcollapse.com. Make sure you sign up for his newsletter. But John, I was thinking, we need to put together a time traveler's portfolio so that if any of you manage to go back in time, you don't have to remember pages or anything else. We will give you the top 10 performing stocks for the past generation. And then you'll just be able to buy those stocks if you go back 20, 30 years. Maybe they won't even be public. Maybe they won't even exist, but eventually they will come into being, and then you can buy stock in them and you won't have to work. I mean, think of how good that would be, a time traveler's portfolio.
Well, every finance nerd has that portfolio in their head, right? The things they should have done, what you should have bought. You should have bought silver in the early 70s, shorted it in 1980, bought tech stocks in 1990, shorted them in 2000, turned that money right over into Bitcoin as soon as Bitcoin existed, rode that from, a nickel to $19,000, and then just fade away as a multi-billionaire. That's all you had to do. And why the heck didn't we do that, Kerry? I
don't know.
Still can't get over not doing any of those things.
Hey, well, we should have bought Bitcoin. We should have spent $10 on Bitcoin in 2010, and then sold it when it hit 19,000. Yeah, and getting ready.
Why didn't we do that? It would have been so easy.
So
2
obvious.
trades, right? Buy it, then a few years later you sell it. That's all you had to do.
It's so obvious.
But a good investment life is one in which you get one of those things that I just mentioned kind of sort of right, and that's not too much to ask, that you catch one big wave, right? And that changes your life, and then you're rich, and then everything is different after that. So
like Great Bear could have been one, or Bre-X before it crashed. There's a lot of these stocks that you see that are going to go huge. I mean, one of my sponsors, I think it's that kind of stock, but we don't know if it's going to be, and I'm not telling you to buy it, but Asino Resources, this guy Hayadan grew up in Namibia on a ranch, and he either had to go into ranching or open a store or become a mining engineer. So of course he chose being mining engineer, and he's had 2 strikes in Namibia. He's had his 3rd strike. He sold the companies off for a couple $100 million each. So there's a case where, hey, the stock came out at 35. It went up to $1 Canadian. Now it's down to 59. Maybe you don't need to know the future to know what's going to happen with that one, because every hole he's drilling, John, is getting like 1 gram, 2 grams, 5 grams per ton. So, and Namibia happens to be like the Switzerland of Africa, if you can imagine.
Well, every cycle has a few junior gold and silver miners who do something like that, who just will change your life if you get in at the beginning and ride it to the peak. And so there are some out there like that right now. And we just have to figure out which ones they are, and then when to sell. See, the second conversation is, okay, it's up 10,000%. Is now the time to sell? Because it looks like it could double one more time, and you have to be really careful that you don't get round tripped in some crazy little story like that.
Which is
so the hard part is knowing when to get out.
Well, when that thing goes up 5 or 10-fold, you can safely sell off half of it and let the rest ride. It was like what I told you to do on Bitcoin back in December of 2017. I said, we all know that Bitcoin is going to infinity. So if you sell half of what you own now at 19,000, or maybe it was 17,000 when I wrote it, it went down so quickly. You sell half of your Bitcoin now, hey, you're going to still have half of infinity, and half of infinity is not so bad.
Yeah. Well, that's what you hope you do. Take your profits at the right times. It's hard to do when something's going up, because another doubling just looks so easy based on what's happened lately and all the great news coming out of that company or that asset. It's just
what that's
emotionally
called?
hard to do.
You know what
that's
that's called? You know what that's called, John? That's called greed.
Of course. And bulls make money and bears make money and pigs get slaughtered.
Yeah, pigs
goes, but it's hard not to be a pig in that situation.
Yeah, pigs get turned into sausage. That's what happens. Wall Street specializes in that. They have a special process for it. And, the other thing is, when you get on that high, man, you're getting dopamine hits constantly, and it feels so freaking good. And then eventually the dopamine hits stop because the stock or whatever the asset is starts going down, and boom, you are like dead before you know it. It's pretty, it's so interesting. It's human nature, John. But seriously, why would somebody bet that gold's going up to 4,000 when it's barely at 1,500 now? I mean, it's trading around 1,460 something. Why would anybody do this, John?
Well, there are variations of this story that come out maybe once or twice a year, where you'll see a zero hedge headline or something about somebody who just bet $2 million that the S&P 500 is going to tank by the end of next month, and so far those things haven't really turned into anything. And I think the general story here is that people make big bets sometimes, and people with a lot of money make notably big bets. To them, it's not that much money. And, if you're a billionaire and you bet a couple of $1 million on something, that's nothing to you, but it's notable for the media and, for us and everything. But so far of the stories like this I've seen, none of them really worked out. That person who bet the $2 million on the S&P 500 tanking didn't make $500 million from the options. More than likely, the options just expired worthless that they bought. So that's kind of background noise in the market. You see some big bets being made by people who have a feeling, or they have some inside information that they think is valid, and then they act on it. And frequently it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Now, I would love this one to work out. If this worked out, you and I would be having a very different conversation 2 months hence, right? Because you'd be on your yacht. Yeah. And I'm not sure where I would be. It would be someplace really cool, and that would be fun. But you don't want to follow big bets like that just because they happen every once in a while. You don't want to bet the farm on this guy being right, because we don't know what his information is or what his feeling is. I think a more interesting story in the gold market right now was that Poland secretly moved $5 billion worth of its gold from London to its own vaults, because central banks are now net buyers of gold out there, which is a very big deal for the gold market, because that's a lot of new buying coming in from people who were net sellers until very recently. And the fact that it was done secretly is kind of a sign of nervousness out there on the part of even central banks. They don't trust each other. It used to be that London would be the place where you would keep your gold if you were somebody like Poland. Mm-hmm. But now, every once in a while you see these stories about London not giving somebody's gold back. Yeah. Venezuela gets stiffed on their gold because London won't send it back to them. And so if you're Poland and you see a lot of stresses in the world, especially if you're in the Eurozone and you're a fairly traditional conservative country like Poland, and you're being pushed around by the EU super government, and you see debt building up everywhere, maybe you want to hold as much gold as possible, and you want to hold it on hand where you can keep track of it, and you don't have to worry about London giving it back when you ask for it. So that's a sign of both an interest in gold on the part of central banks and signs of stress in the global financial system, that we don't trust each other the way we used to. And that is probably fairly important for the gold market, because if Poland feels that way, lots of other countries feel that way. Germany repatriated some of its gold a while ago, and there have been several other instances of central banks asking for their gold back from the US and from Great Britain. And what that means is that under the surface, among the people who ought to know, there are big signs of stress. And that's manifesting as a flight to safety. People are loading up on gold in various ways. Big players are loading up on gold in various ways in anticipation of trouble in the global financial system, which, that's kind of a no-brainer if you just look at the numbers. The latest global debt number just came out, and it was, 250 trillion? Some big multiple of global GDP, and the per capita debt now is like $22,000, including everybody on earth, $22,000 for Africans and Latin Americans. And, the numbers are just so outrageous that there's no way out of this without some kind of a big crisis. And you're seeing even central banks now start to act on that premise, on that fear. And that's interesting for gold, because it means that if those guys are right, or even if they're just overly nervous, they're going to act in ways that become kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, if central banks get very nervous and start loading up on gold, that pushes the gold price up. So that's a good sign for precious metals going forward.
And there's multiple debt bubbles. Let's not forget, John, in the good old days before central banks were free to print to infinity, you could have one bubble, but you wouldn't have multiple bubbles. We've got real estate bubbles, we got debt bubbles, we got student loan bubbles, subprime auto bubbles. I mean, you name it. We got a bubble for every asset class that's out there. And that's strictly as a result of the central bank's ability to create unlimited quantities of dollars and any other currency for that matter.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Financial Survival Network is brought to you today by Orin Resources, a junior exploration company with the appetite of a major. It's hot on the trail of the next globally significant discovery, creating enormous potential upside for you, the shareholder. Orin is one of the most aggressive exploration companies pursuing high-grade, scalable gold and copper deposits, and has a premier 7-project portfolio, including its 2 flagships, Committee Bay in the Arctic and Sombrero in Peru. Orin's unparalleled technical team and highly experienced management has a history of success in advancing and monetizing exploration assets. No wonder Orin's been called one of the best in the junior exploration sector. Orin trades on the TSX and the NYSE under AUG. To learn more, go to orinresources.com. That's AURYN resources.com.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the everything bubble now. In the past, you're right. There have been very specific bubbles in fairly narrow sectors, junk bonds and tech stocks and housing in the U.S. And when they burst, that took the global financial system to the edge of the abyss, but not over. There were still possibilities of inflating our way out of it. But now, as Jim Rickards says, the last time around, the central banks bailed out the big commercial banks. But now it's the central banks that are over leveraged. Who's going to bail them out? Who bails out the Fed and the ECB and the BOJ when it turns out that their balance sheets are too big to manage and their currencies are starting to plunge? Now, he says it'll be the IMF, but that's a little hard to picture, since the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which is like the central bank to central bankers, it has a currency called the SDR, special drawing rights, which is, get this, based on a basket of other currencies. So how if the dollar and the euro and the yen are starting to tank, how is a currency based on a basket of those other currencies worth anything. You know, how is that a rock solid currency that you can use to reflate the global financial system? I don't know. Doesn't seem feasible. But even if we get to the point where the IMF has to step in to bail out the Fed, that's enough chaos for me. You know, that could be the end of this whole
that is the end.
Investment thesis. You know, just at that point, the financial markets are going to be in such turmoil that gold will spike, stocks will tank, you know, all that stuff will happen. And so be it. Then let the IMF bail out the Fed. We cash out just as that gets going and make a ton of money. And that would be enough for me to fade off into the sunset.
Yeah.
And not be a gloom and doom.
Yeah. How do you define money in that situation, though?
Oh, gold and silver coins.
Yeah,
you know, you definitely want to be in real money. Well, you want to be there now, but when the Fed needs a bailout, you seriously want to be in real money. You know, you want to be in things that the IMF and the Fed and the Bank of England can't just make more of, you know, and that's only gold and silver and real stuff. Own your house outright, maybe have some, you know, a nice rental property, own a lot of gold and silver, and you'll kind of sail through the process of the IMF bailing out the other central banks and creating a new global monetary system in reasonably good shape, because your stuff will still have utility, regardless of what happens to all these other currencies when they take their gigantic haircuts as part of their bailout.
Yeah. Well, no doubt it's coming.
Well, something is definitely coming. And the numbers are so impossible already that it feels like it's coming soon. You know, I hate to say that, though, because I might have said that once or twice before.
I think?
In prior years, and we didn't hit that wall. But God, the numbers are just so crazy right now, and getting crazier all the time. You know, we're accelerating the debt buildup. We're not pulling back at all. The U.S. is running $1 trillion deficits. And did you see the Japan news where they came out and said that the Japanese central bank said, well, monetary policy can't do everything, so we need fiscal stimulus. And the Japanese government, which on a per capita basis has run the biggest deficits in human history, just came out with a proposed big increase in stimulus spending. And see, that's the kind of thing that happens at the peak of cycles, you know, the peak of bubbles, when people just let loose and start doing record borrowing after a decade of previous record borrowing. And so I think that's also a big piece of news, because it tells us what's going to happen going forward. You know, we're all turning Japanese, as the saying goes. All governments are in the same spot as Japan. They're just a little further behind. So now that Japan has to run massive deficits to keep its economy from tipping into deflation, which would basically destroy an over-leveraged financial system, they have to spend more and more and more money to get any kind of a result. And at some point, you know, the lines cross where the more you borrow, you get negative returns from that instead of a positive return in terms of GDP. And then it's game over. And so Japan, along with a lot of the other big governments, are heading in that direction, where the marginal productivity of debt is dropping towards zero. When it's hit zero, that means you can borrow all you want to and you get nothing back for it.
Yeah, well, I think it's
and we're headed that way.
I think it is actually going negative now, right? Where you borrow more and it actually hurts economic activity because of we've hit saturation level, right?
Well, we still have positive GDP growth, at least in the official numbers. So we're not getting negative returns on our debt yet, but the positive returns are shrinking really dramatically. You know, it used to be that you could in the 1960s in the U.S., say, you could borrow $1 billion and get a new $1 billion of GDP out of it. So one for one.
Yes.
And now it takes $6 of new debt to get $1 new dollar of GDP.
A small price to pay for growth, right?
Yeah. Well, for the guys doing it, it's a small price because there is no price right now.
Exactly.
You know, you can borrow as much money as you want to with impunity, politically and financially. But the day will come when that's not true. Of course, the guys in charge now are, you know, they're old and they're rich, which means they think they can play out the clock on their own careers. In other words, spend a couple of years borrowing insane amounts of money and being treated like a financial genius if you're running the Fed or whatever, and then leave, take all the money with you, when all the money you've built up over a career of just hitting send at the Fed, with trillions of dollars,
print.
And go off and be rich and let your successor deal with the consequences. So that's what they're hoping.
Well, it worked for Bernanke. It worked for Yellen. Who is it going to stop working for?
Oh, even Alan Greenspan, who was just this, he's going to be seen in the history books as this monster financially, and the guy is still treated like the maestro, like the guy who saved the global economy several times and this financial genius and everything. And really, all he did was print money and hand it to people. How hard is that? How courageous do you have to be to give play money to other rich people? And that is all that guy did. And he's so old now that there's a good chance that he won't live to see the consequences of his bad behavior. But Bernanke and Yellen, I think they'll be around to have to face the consequences of what they did.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. But they'll be out of the country. They'll be at their villa someplace heavily protected, right? And
all those guys are going to New Zealand, right? They're building their private airstrips and their bunkers out in the the semi-outback of New Zealand, and they're just going to weather the storm on an island in the Pacific, and then recover. Come out of their bunker and see what happens 20 or 30 years later.
That's certainly what they're hoping.
They probably won't even have the news on. They won't even have the internet, so they won't even know any of this is happening. They'll just be lying in the sun, having drinks mixed for them.
That's great. It makes you feel so good. Well, anyways, I guess that's about it for this week, John. We will catch up with you next week. Check out dollarcollapse.com. Check out financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Sign up for both our newsletters. John, have a happy and a healthy. Oh, don't forget Twitter feed at Kerry Lutz, Facebook page, Financial Survival Network. And, well, that's it. So we'll talk to you next week, John.
Okay, Kerry. See ya.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.